Hello and welcome to Stampscaping 101. We're going to be finishing off 3 stamp sketches that have been grayscale applied for shadows and lighting, okay? So when we're applying color here, I'm going to approach these 3 different compositions with a similar, or almost the same color scheme. And one of the tricks that I learned in oil painting classes when I was in college was you give your kind of blank canvas just a wash of some warm tone. Typically it was like a sepia or a burnt umber type of color. The Distress Ink Antique Linen is a pretty good base coat for that type of purpose. It's a warm tone. It's pretty pale and aged looking, which Distress Inks are supposed to look. And it's very light in value, so it's not a big commitment to any type of color. But it serves as a really good foundation for any type of color scheme or even temperature scheme, believe it or not. You can do an entire blue-toned, midnight winter scene with something like antique linen as your base layer. You might not see it as antique linen in the end result, but it creates this kind of base level glow kind of happening within your pieces. And that's attributed to the fact that dye-based inks are transparent, okay? Just like alcohol inks and whatnot, they're clear, as opposed to something like translucent inks, which kind of like pigment inks or something like that would be. Okay, so I'm building these up, and I just went through walnut stain, okay? Now I'm moving into peeled paint, which is the Distress Ink kind of greenish hue. Again, it's just kind of an aged one. Now, you can mix and match or substitute any type of dye-based inks, in this type of process here. I'm just happen to be using the Distress Inks ones because I have it. And I know a lot of you out there use that, so I'm just trying to follow suit with that. But one of the things about the Distress Inks is they are supposed to look aged and weathered, so they're fairly dull in terms of the intensity scheme. Not dull in terms of interest level or visual interest level, okay? But I will try to amp up the intensity level with a couple other brands of inks to supplement these ones. You can see right here, it's just, they're very light and, like I said, aged looking, which they're supposed to, okay? So those are 3 layers of colors right there. And in real time, I don't know, that didn't take too long. I have this sped up 4 times here, but in real time, I don't know, those kind of base layers of colors probably took about 15 minutes or so. And as we move up through different values, I'm moving into a memento green here. It's a fairly light green as well. But you can see kind of the changes happening here in terms of intensity. When I go through these different layers and add in incrementally darker tones, I'm moving through different values of intensity as well, okay? I usually start light and dull, and then I work up to darker and bright. And the reason for that is just because the darker and brighter colors stand out a lot more. So if I get a base layer of these lighter tones and duller tones, it's just easier to blend in those darker ones to come. Okay, so I'm going for largely, green grass here. They call it local color. Grasses are green, dirt is brown, and sky is blue, okay? You don't always have to work that way. Some of the most dynamic types of kind of lighting situations and color situations are more what they call like the golden hour, where, it's like an hour before sunrise, or, an hour before, or I don't know, during sunset and twilight when you can get into different colors and whatnot. But this is local color. But even local color, grass is green, sky is blue, etc. It doesn't have to be boring, though. So that's why we're working with multiple tones of green, brown, etc. in that grassy area, just so it looks like a much richer, varied palette of green in there. And where we start moving into some darker tones, coming up here soon, is when we can develop our shadows a little bit more. Now, all of these have been developed already in terms of a grayscale application of lighting, fairly minimal, okay? But these colors enhance that whole aspect of it, okay? Okay, so we're going in with the blue here, but one of the things about this type of coloring, a lot of people find it, you know, in the end result, they think it looks complicated. And it's because we're not bound by outlines or something like that, where colors are bound by kind of an area, a shape, you know, defined by an outline, okay? So here I'm using blues. You can see I'm using it in the sky, but I also bring a little bit down into my brown area and also into grass, certainly into grass because blue is a component of green, okay? Now, when we don't do something like that, there's less continuity. Let's say if I just left that road strictly brown and the sky was just only green, just like down there in that grass, you can see where I've put some blue in that grass area. You create these continuity, I know you might call it a needle and thread between various spaces. Okay, now here I'm using a very pale pink. It's a very bright pink, but I'm removing so much of it off on that, you know, my blotter, you know, paper, that I'm applying just so little. Can you see that little tiny hint of pink happening? I mean, it is so little with, I don't know, 30 strokes, but using drier applications of your various inks, no matter how bright they are, will yield kind of a duller, lighter application. So see, I'm bringing some of that pink into that grass, and anywhere where you see that light. So what that pink up in the sky represents is it's a pinkish light. Okay, so if you took a pinkish light and you shined it on various things, it would look pink, you know. Even a white wall, a pink light would look pink on it. So that's how you create this kind of visual dialogue between light source and reflected light, okay? So the light source is the light area up in the sky, and the areas that you've retained light in your landscape. In this case, it's grass, and in that water, there was some little barns out there. So I'm doing that to reiterate lighting and reflected light, okay? You know, because you're bringing that same related color into your different areas, so it creates that connection. And I don't know, maybe it's very subtle in some of these, but it could almost create kind of a subconscious kind of continuity and relationship between all the pieces. And that's where these pieces tend to look a little bit more, I don't know, kind of contained in a world unto itself, in terms of feel. Everything's visual, of course, but when you get these connections like that and these relationships, it just feels better too. So you're kind of creating a kind of a kinesthetic type of reaction from your viewer. You know, everything looks very related and, I don't know, just, like I said, contained, you know, by creating these relationships. Okay, now one of the things that I need to do a video on, I'm doing it in application, but I'm not kind of specifying it. But see this, I'm using largely browns, greens, and blues, okay, in terms of my dye-based inks so far, okay? Now, we'll move into some areas with alcohol pens, okay? And I'll use that same kind of color scheme, that same palette of colors in my alcohol inks, and then I'll follow suit with some acrylic paint pens. So see what I mean? You kind of pick a general color scheme, and then through the use of multimedia, it doesn't have to be a mystery in terms of what colors you use. You just use the same kind of color scheme, and as well as value scheme. You know, you kind of use lighter values of those same colors in here. I'll go the darkest with the dye-based inks, though. Okay, I won't go real dark with, you know, alcohol pens or acrylic paint pens. Okay, now I'm developing the shadows a little bit more. And one of the things I mentioned in a previous video is The darker you make certain areas of a scene, the lighter areas will seem. Okay, it doesn't have to be the white area if we've retained some, but just the lighter areas. Okay, now here we start going in with pens, okay? Now just the pens, I mean, they're just, they're much better at getting detailed areas. I can get into those cabin walls, I can put some tone on my rocks in the shadows, so on and so forth. So you use the pens strategically. I mean, I could have colored this whole thing with pens too, markers, but I just find it easier and faster just to work with the dye-based inks. And they make a great combination too, dye-based inks and alcohol markers, because, alcohol and water doesn't mix, so I can color, pretty freely with the markers and not worry about smearing any of my dye-based ink applications of the designs or the color application. Now, what I found is that some of my dye-based inks hadn't dried yet, so I was kind of moving them around a little bit with the alcohol pen, but it's not because it was, putting the dye-based inks back into solution. They just hadn't dried yet. You can heat set these or something like that, and they, get your dye-based inks to set up really fast, because after all, I did use, I don't know, sometimes up to 6 layers of dye-based ink in that, especially in the meadow area. So see, these pens are great for, developing shadows like on these rocks and on that wall there, and, whatever. Sometimes in some of those grassy areas there, so the grass area looks a little bit more varied in terms of the surface. We don't want the grassy meadow just to look like it was like a flat turf football field or something like that. So you create shadows and light throughout that whole area. Okay, now this is my white pigment ink. I'm just using the Hero Arts one in this case. I've been using my Brilliance, but this just comes to show you that you can use any white pigment ink here. Okay, so see that right there? I'm creating a big textural change, and it's also a lighting change within the areas that I apply this, but it's a very light application of it. I call it dry brushing. It's a cotton ball, but it's akin to using a dry brush application if you were doing some painting, okay? But you see that, how it's really changing the spirit of this piece from a textural standpoint? When you add that kind of soft element like that, which is also illuminated, I don't know, it just really expands on kind of the visual vocabulary of a piece, okay? Adding some of this white pigment ink up in those clouds. After all, clouds are very, soft and billowy looking. They're suspended moisture in the air just being illuminated by light, okay? You see that right down there in the meadow? I think that really changed the spirit of that piece too. Now this place looks okay, but now look at that white pigment ink over that tree. Doesn't it look like that light is almost three-dimensional now because it's in front of that tree as well as on that horizon? See that kind of that fog or mist rising from the pond there. Notice how I only did it about halfway up that fisherman there to make it look like a low-lying fog, as opposed to, like pea soup fog where it's over everything. Okay, now here's my pens here. See that? Tan, green, and white. Those are the colors that we've used in this piece, okay? So right here, I'm adding in some highlighting here. I typically start adding it in an area on the scene that's roughly the same value, okay? So I'll start adding it in some of those green areas, but then if I apply some of it in the darker areas, that pen really stands out dark. Now if I apply it on white, it stands out as dark, dark on white, or darker, okay? But from a textural standpoint, this is where you add your crisp element back into things. Things can get a little bit muddy looking, when you're applying so many layers of dye-based inks and alcohol inks, But this is where you can add that nice little crisp element into your pieces. And highlights are all over in the world. It's over your desk. It's, it's on your mouse or something like that. It's on your tablets that you're watching this video on. You'll find these little specular lights, light that's brighter than white. It's where it's reflecting some sort of light. And that's what we're doing here. We're adding that kind of that I don't know, it's almost like life into those areas. And areas that are kind of boring, it brings life to it. And areas that look pretty good, it adds an extra kind of element into it, making it look even livelier and oh, I don't know. It's it's like lighting magic, you know. And these pens really work great for that. And nowadays, I used to just work with a white paint pen, and then a white gel pen. And nowadays they have all these pens in various different shades. So you know how I use that little bit of pink up in my sky? I'll add these little pink wildflowers down into my meadow, so it brings visual continuity between that pink up in the sky, and now I have that same color as wildflowers or something like that. It's a little bit more kind of subconscious, you know. When you bring that up real close, you can see it. There's little pink dots everywhere, but looking at it at arm's distance, it's not like, oh my gosh, that grassy area is full of pink, you know. But one of the things that we learned in kind of, being trained as an illustrator is you can reward a viewer for further inspection by having those kind of detailed areas. And when you have it at arm's distance, I do think that little pink reads as, a pink little element, but it's, a lot more subtle. So all those little types of things really can add to the overall experience or visual experience of your viewer, as well as yourself, because, you're looking at it too, and you can experience it while it's happening, okay? So anyways, bringing some life into these scenes with some color. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks so much for watching.